The COVID-19 timeline gives us the following conclusion. The COVID virus is a bioweapon of the Anglo-Saxon mission targeting China. COVID-19 is a well-planned pandemic gone wrong. Before they managed to attack Wuhan with the virus, it escaped from their lab. Just as the US dropped germ bombs in Antung in 1952, the Wuhan outbreak was very likely caused by US virus bombs. The COVID timeline began with Jack London's 1910 call to exterminate the Chinese race by secret biowarfare. London got his inspiration to exterminate the Chinese people with bioweapons from the Bohemian Club, an Anglo-Saxon elite gang that runs the world secretly. Then in 1943, Fort Detrick became the site of the US Army Biological Warfare Laboratories, where Nazi war criminal scientists weaponized pathogens and toxins for use against humans and plants, using Japanese war crime research. This incomplete list of deadly lab accidents is a sign that the US will be destroyed by the bioweapon made by itself, like Victor Frankenstein. In 1952, US bombardiers sneaked into China and dropped germ bombs at Anton. Their germ bombs were developed from Japanese war crime research during World War II. In 1968, prominent US scientist Gordon MacDonald established a timeline for the US foreign policy that secret biowarfare to attack competitor nations will be ready by 2018. US Vatican writer Dean Koontz changed the bioweapon in his novel from Russia's Gorky 400 to China's Wuhan 400 in its 1989 release after the collapse of the Soviet Union, hinting the Anglo-Saxon biowarfare on China would be a false flag op to blame it on their victim. In 1996, Anglo-Saxon bioweapon makers recovered the RNA of the most lethal 1918 influenza virus. In 2001, the US rejected a protocol to strengthen the Biological Weapons Convention. In 2004, based on hearsay from the Anglo-Saxon mission meetings, Sylvia Browne, a self-proclaimed psychic and medium, founder of the Gnostic Masonic Christian Church, loosely predicted the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the 2009 swine flu pandemic, which was faked by the World Health Organization. In 2005, the US resurrected the most lethal virus, the 1918 flu virus, as a bioweapon candidate. In 2005, senior Freemasons met in the City of London to follow up the Anglo-Saxon biowarfare mission on China. This evil mission was exposed on YouTube in 2010, 9 years before the COVID attack on Wuhan.
He heard this being discussed in this meeting. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population. It's racially targeted against the Chinese people. It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people. And these people in this meeting were laughing about this. They said, China will catch a cold. Those were their words. China will catch a cold. And they were laughing about the fact that these biological weapons will wreak havoc among the Chinese population. It's called the Anglo-Saxon mission. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population.
According to Czech molecular biologist Dr. Sona Pekova, the mutation of the COVID-19 virus was very likely carried out through genetic modification.
No, u tohoto viru v tom velíně to vypadá, jako kdyby někdo přišel do velína, otvíral ty skříně, vyházel z nich všechno, převracel židle a kdyby to byla přírodní varianta, tak těžko si člověk jakože představí, že takhle rozsáhlé mutace, inzerce, delece, bodové různé, že by se staly náhodně a že by ten virus v průběhu toho procesu neumřel, protože
An Indian research team has identified 4 unique inserts in the COVID-19 virus spike glycoprotein that are not present in any other coronavirus reported till date. More shockingly, all the 4 inserts in the virus map to short segments of amino acids in the HIV-1, GP120, and GAG. This explains why the COVID-19 virus behaves like HIV, evading immune response. This also explains why US military bans anyone hospitalized for COVID-19 from enlisting.
It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people.
US bioweapon, the COVID virus, have murdered 4,634 Chinese people. China was caught off guard when the US released their bioweapon on Wuhan. The sudden huge number of patients overwhelmed their healthcare system, resulting in a higher death rate. But China soon put the pandemic under control. All China's COVID death happened before the 17th of May, 2020. 3 factors have helped thwart the Anglo-Saxon mission from paralyzing China. First, lock down the city completely.
It's so important that we recognize that to the people of Wuhan, it is recognized. The world's in your debt. The world's in your debt.
Second, China is 100% BCG vaccinated. Stats show BCG vaccine limits COVID spread and severity. Third, traditional Chinese herbal treatment proven effective. On the 6th of February, 2020, China recommended this recipe of herbs to all her citizens who had flu-like symptoms and fever, so that each person might be treated from home without swarming into hospitals, thus avoided cross-infection in hospitals and helped reduce pressure on the healthcare system. Only those whose fever remained after 3 days herbal treatment should go to hospital. See, Yeshua has thwarted the Anglo-Saxon mission. Hallelujah. In 2008, Sylvia Browne made a second prediction on the COVID-19 pandemic, but not an accurate one. In 2011, Warner Media released a thriller, Contagion, foreshadowing the Anglo-Saxon attack on China. In 2012, the London Olympic opening ceremony declared to the whole world, in Masonic argot, the COVID-19 attack on China. This woman represents China. She senses something creepy is going on.
J.K. Rowling, the creator of
These
Harry Potter.
cages for wild animals are telling us the Anglo-Saxon will blame China for the coronavirus from eating game. In 2015, US lab engineered bat coronavirus, giving the virus the power to infect human cells and to start a pandemic. In 2017, Fauci predicted a surprise pandemic during Trump's presidency.
The idea that we are now a few days away from a new administration, given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, is that there is no question that there will be a surprise outbreak. The thing we're extraordinarily confident about is that we are going to see this in the next few years. Thank you.
Heeding Fauci's prediction, the Trump administration ran a simulation exercise with the code named Crimson Contagion between January and August 2019. Crimson Contagion simulates a pandemic of respiratory virus that begins in China and quickly spread around the world to inform all US politicians of the coming Anglo-Saxon mission against China. On the 26th of June, 2020, a Jesuit university in Spain claims that the COVID-19 virus was detected in Barcelona's wastewater samples collected on the 12th of March, 2019. No COVID virus is found in the samples of any other days. However, this Jesuit paper was clearly put together in a slapdash way. Two facts are miscited in the first paragraph alone. Was their sample contaminated? If not, the COVID virus must be brought to Spain by an asymptomatic military man of the US on a one-day trip in March 2019. As you can see, US troops are all over the globe, especially in countries around China and Russia. Studies from both UK and China have also proved the US as the COVID origin. The virus strain in Wuhan was not the ancestor strain. The United States has the ancestor strain of COVID-19. Canada, Europe, and Australia all got their first COVID cases from the US. Starting from the 21st of April, 2019, sporadic cases of COVID-19, in the guise of vaping illness, appeared all over the United States. Vaping was made a scapegoat for the early COVID-19 outbreaks in the US, because vaping makes people more susceptible to COVID-19. According to CDC, as of the 21st of January 2020, 2,711 were hospitalized, and 60 died, because of the fake vaping illness, true COVID-19. CDC said, US vaping illness cases peaked in September 2019, and have declined since. Why vaping illness declined after September? Because flu season starts after September. Now CDC was able to dress all the US COVID cases in a new gown, flu's clothing. More revealing is this: as soon as the first official COVID case was identified in the United States on the 21st of January, 2020, vaping illness miraculously disappeared altogether from the American soil. On the 30th of June, 2020, the first large scale of COVID-19 broke out at Green Spring in Springfield. 3 died, 63 sickened.
Tonight, a deadly outbreak in Virginia. 2 deaths and dozens of residents sickened by a respiratory illness here at the Green Spring retirement community.
For a respiratory outbreak to occur in July would certainly not be as likely as for it to occur during the winter.
Symptoms ranging from a bad cough to pneumonia. No promising leads on how the sudden illness broke out.
Sick residents have been quarantined to their rooms. New residents are not being admitted, and all staff are wearing masks and protective gloves until test results bring about answers.
Why didn't WHO pick up any US media statements concerning this first COVID outbreak, with 3 deaths and 63 cases? But they instantly picked up a Chinese media statement reporting an outbreak of no death, but only 27 cases? Why didn't the US and WHO stop COVID-19 right at Fairfax County and save millions of lives around the world? Was WHO an accomplice in the Anglo-Saxon mission, covering up for the US, as what it did in 1952, when the US bombed China with germ bombs? In July 2019, a second COVID-19 outbreak at the same county.
We now know a second Fairfax County retirement community is battling a respiratory illness outbreak. The health department telling us 25 people have gotten sick at Heatherwood in Burke. For 2 people it has turned into pneumonia. No one has died. Heatherwood sits just 7 miles from Springfield's Green Spring retirement community, where 3 people have died. The Fairfax County Health Department says the CDC tested 17 samples from Green Spring, but the results don't give any clear answer to what the mystery illness is. The CDC tested 17 samples from Green Spring, but the results don't give any clear answer to what the mystery illness is. Since late June, more than 60 residents at Green Spring's Garden Ridge Extra Care Facility have gotten sick. About 2 dozen went to the hospital, and we've now learned nearly 20 employees have gotten sick also. Health officials say what makes these outbreaks unusual is when they are happening. They tell ABC7 in the winter they're not unusual, but why they're happening in the summer remains a mystery.
Come on. This is no mystery to the CIA and CDC. It happened in summer because the COVID virus had escaped from the CIA bioweapon lab. The Frankenstein they had made has outwitted them and escaped and struck the world. Apart from these first two outbreaks in Virginia, the neighbor of the CIA bioweapon lab, the entire state reported 50% more respiratory illness cases in July than usual. In July 2019, the same month of the second COVID-19 outbreak, CDC shut down the CIA bioweapon lab in Fort Detrick. In the same July, CDC removed its expert job in China, so that the US can not only blame the whole pandemic on China, but also accuse China of censoring information about the outbreak. So, 2 respiratory illness outbreaks in 10 days in hot summer. Virginia reported 50% more respiratory illness cases in July than usual. Both epicenters were retirement homes neighboring the CIA bioweapon lab. CDC shut down the CIA bioweapon lab after the 2 outbreaks. CDC failed to identify the pathogen that caused the outbreaks. CDC expert job in China was axed after the 2 outbreaks in the US. Are all these just coincidences? Ian Fleming has given us the answer. These are no coincidences. They are enemy actions. According to Japanese doctors, COVID-19 had invaded Japan in August 2019, or even earlier, due to the presence of IgG antibodies in a frozen serum sample dated the 24th of September, 2019. In September 2019, Trump signed an executive order to modernize flu vaccines, but we soon found out this order was not for flu vaccines, but for coronavirus vaccines, evidenced by Fauci's $19 million coronavirus vaccine contract to Graphics in the same month. Next, we found the entire Trump gang were all vaccinated by April.
What's up, Barry?
Alright, man.
What do you know, baby?
You can take out the mask, Doug. The case fatality rate's like 0.1 to 0.3 according to USC.
Is it really? That's reassuring.
USC.
Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway. Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway. Everybody here's been vaccinated anyway.
But the Trumpian vaccine is not working well. Trump and his wife tested positive for COVID-19 on the first day of October. Like all flu vaccines, the Trumpian vaccine is good for a few months, its effectiveness ranging from 15% to 40%. By September 2019, 4 months before the Wuhan outbreak, the Anglo-Saxon elite were all well prepared for COVID-19. In October 2019, Maryland, the home state of the CIA bioweapon lab, recorded 3,154 hospital trips with flu-like symptoms, but only 0.44% of the 3,000 cases were actually influenza. The pathogens responsible for the 99.9% flu-like symptoms remained unidentified because FDA banned all state labs and commercial labs from coronavirus tests through the EUA policy until the 29th of February, 2020, so as to cover up the CIA COVID-19 virus leak.
So we could have people in the United States dying for what appears to be influenza when in fact it could be the coronavirus or COVID-19.
Some cases have been actually diagnosed that way in the United States today.
Thank you.
Because COVID-19 is very much flu-like and malaria-like, COVID patients are still being misdiagnosed as flu, as evidenced by this Canadian COVID patient.
I called my doctor and she says, well, I told her all my symptoms. She says that it's probably flu, so I should be careful. But, 3 days later, my mother got sick and I called her doctor. But because she didn't have a problem with breathing again, she didn't have criteria for testing. So even though she had a fever, at least I didn't have a fever. So
your mom's 75, your dad's 80 years old, both now with COVID, and your father in difficult
in ICU.
In ICU.
It's been 2 weeks, the worst 2 weeks in my life.
So, COVID-19 was engineered to be with symptoms similar to flu and malaria, to deceive both the patients and doctors. Their targets are: over 80% of cases are mild, and over 80% of the victims do not have any symptoms, to ensure the pandemic to be a secret warfare, to thoroughly weaken the population of competitor nations, to make the real war easy for their armed forces, as instructed by Gordon MacDonald. So we see the culprit of the pandemic has 10 times more COVID-19 patients than the diagnosed. The true number of COVID-19 cases in the United States has reached 76 million as of today. Based on the numbers we just mentioned, we can conclude that the so-called vaping illness, respiratory illness with unknown cause, and flu are actually the 4% of severe COVID cases in the United States between April 2019 and February 2020. In October 2019, COVID-19 pneumonia was already circulating in Italy.
E questo lo vedevano in ottobre, novembre, dicembre, quindi questo virus circola da tanto tempo.
Ecco, però mi scusi, ma perché? Ecco, ma perché gli esperti ci hanno continuato a dire anche a gennaio e anche agli inizi di febbraio? Io mi sono messo per primo, io ho creduto a questa linea. È un'influenza, ci sono casi molto gravi, però perché? Perché non si conosceva il virus, la pericolosità di questo virus?
Per due ragioni. La prima ragione è che è difficile, quando hai a che fare una cosa nuova è difficile. E poi gli esperti non sono tutti uguali, perché ci sono stati degli esperti che hanno detto subito: guardate che siamo di fronte a una cosa veramente grave. E questa è una pandemia globale, questo è un problema che riguarda tutta l'umanità.
On the 18th of October, 2019, the same day of the 7th Military World Games began in Wuhan, the US held their freakish Event 201, a COVID-19 pandemic exercise.
Event 201 that was co-hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum, etc. back in October 2019, that was wargaming, simulating an pandemic exercise. What would happen in the event of a globally spreading coronavirus pandemic? And they wargamed it out, and this is what we'll do, and this is how you shut down international travel, and this is what will happen to business, and this is how we keep business going, and this is how we deal with misinformation online. They did the entire exercise, and it's been talked about at length, but only by those crazy conspiracy theorists who think there's anything at all, any reason at all to even wonder about the holding of a pandemic exercise simulating the spread of a globally spreading coronavirus, novel coronavirus, at the exact moment that we are led to believe that a globally spreading novel coronavirus pandemic was breaking out. If you think that that's strange in any way, well...
During the 7th Military World Games late October in Wuhan, 5 US athletes displayed flu-like, malaria-like symptoms, and were immediately airlifted back to the United States. Many Chinese believe these 5 US athletes were the first COVID-19 patients in China. Many European athletes claim they contracted COVID-19 at the Military World Games in October in Wuhan, and fell terribly ill following the games. On November 7, 2019, Bill Gates ominously appeared in a Netflix documentary, The Next Pandemic, and predicted a coronavirus-like outbreak, down to it starting at a Chinese wet market, where animals are sold alive and killed on the spot for the buyer. In November 2019, CDC posted job listings for quarantine advisors in 19 US cities, 1 month before the Wuhan outbreak. On November 16, 2019, France had its first confirmed COVID-19 case. Sweden says coronavirus cases likely in country as early as November 2019. US Mayor Michael Pelham had COVID-19 in November 2019.
I was gravely ill in November, when I was certainly gravely ill, and I'd never been that ill in my adult life. And I had virtually every single one of the symptoms. The facts are this: either I had it in November before anybody admits that it was here, or I had it in January, February, or March, and I was asymptomatic, which is highly unlikely for me. The test that I took has two different antibody results. It has something called the IgG and the IgM. The IgM is the more recent, which would have shown that that antibody is more recent in my system. My body more recently fought the coronavirus. The IgG is the longer lasting one, and that's the one I tested positive.
In November 2019, 1 month before the Wuhan outbreak, CIA warned Trump of the non-existent coronavirus pandemic sweeping across Wuhan.
We are now learning that as far back as late November, American military medical investigators overseas sounded the alarm to officials right here at home about a contagion that was sweeping through Wuhan. Those concerns that the virus could be devastating were detailed in a report, and multiple sources have described that report to our team.
In November 2019, 1 month before the Wuhan outbreak, the White House warned NATO and IDF of the non-existent coronavirus pandemic sweeping across Wuhan. U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar had been monitoring COVID-19 since December 2019, 1 month before the Wuhan outbreak.
We've been monitoring this virus and preparing a response since back in December.
Unidentified respiratory outbreak hit Los Angeles in December 2019, before the Wuhan outbreak was reported. On the last day of December 2019, 6 hours after Dr. Lee alerted his fellow doctors to the 7 cases of SARS in his hospital, Wuhan officials reported 27 cases of viral pneumonia in the city, instructing the people to stay home and put on masks. This is the first day when the world heard about the Wuhan outbreak of 27 COVID-19 cases. All who knew about the Wuhan outbreak before this day are culprits and accomplices of the COVID-19 attack on China. This COVID timeline has made it clear that the US, and the US alone, knew about the COVID virus inside out many months before the Wuhan outbreak. Fauci foretold a surprise pandemic during Trump's presidency. 3 years before the Wuhan outbreak, Fauci spent $19 million on coronavirus vaccine last September. 3 months before the Wuhan outbreak, Washington, D.C. company executive told Mikazenko about the coming COVID-19 pandemic. 3 months before the Wuhan outbreak, the US simulated the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 months before the Wuhan outbreak, Bill Gates predicted a coronavirus-like pandemic, starting from a wet market in China. 2 months before the Wuhan outbreak, CIA warned the White House and NATO and IDF of the Wuhan outbreak. 1 month ahead of the Wuhan outbreak, Alex Azar was monitoring the coronavirus. 1 month before the Wuhan outbreak. You see, the US is the real culprit of the pandemic that has murdered over 1 million people worldwide and sickened 40 million. But this is how the Trump gang lies to the world.
China's cover-up of the Wuhan virus allowed the disease to spread all over the world, instigating a global pandemic that has cost more than 100,000 American lives and over 1 million lives worldwide. Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization and pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities.
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
Do you believe that there is proof of the same?
There is absolutely no evidence for that at all. In fact, we've worked with the lab in Wuhan for 15 years now. We know everything they do, and we know that they do not have that virus in the lab. And we know that they do not have that virus in the lab.
As a side note, the evil US government is punishing scientist Peter Daszak with an iron fist for speaking out the truth for the Wuhan lab. This map of US biolabs around the world is better than 1,000 words. The United States is the devil that poisons the whole world and blames its competitors for its own crimes. The COVID-19 pandemic is the first step of the Anglo-Saxon mission, developed over 100 years ago, through the pen of Jack London, from the Bohemian Club, an elite invitation-only social club, founded in San Francisco in 1872. According to Gordon MacDonald, the secret biowarfare will be followed by overt armed forces. The pandemic was meant to thoroughly weaken the enemies before the real war. Bill Ryan's testimony posted on YouTube 10 years ago agrees with MacDonald's 1968 statement that the pandemic will be followed by the real war.
Then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. And then, he said, then the real war starts. Something that would be justifiably called the Third World War, with a much more major nuclear exchange.
Chilling, isn't it? And that is not all. In September 2020, the US held an island assault exercise featuring an MQ-9 Reaper drone superimposed over a red silhouette of China. Is that a message that the US will nuke China very soon? Western media demonize every truth that reveals the true origin of COVID-19 as conspiracy theory, and this truly malicious conspiracy theory, from a lying US lawyer, is beautified as extraordinary theory. But the truth stands tall, as it is written, in the day of my vengeance, I will repay, their foot will slip. Yes, their day of disaster is near, and the impending judgment rushes upon them.